Okay, so I'm going to start recording this. We have a tutorial. You should have access to this. It's a PDF file, which is found on the news item in your D2L for the course. So this is the type of thing that you saw a problem like this in the test. And no doubt you'll see a problem like this again in a final exam or a lab or whatever. So some more marks. So it's worth us going through this tutorial to make sure that we can do this. So in this example, it asks you to write pseudocode and then Python code for a problem. And you, in another situation, you might do a flowchart and then pseudocode and then Python code. So what we need to do is we need to sort of analyze the problem first and then come up with our sort of solution. An employee is entering their information to be processed and to determine if they qualify for end of service payment. All right. Employee must enter their first name, last name, number of years they worked for the company, employment status of the salary. Okay, so now we're going to, so we see the problem. The next thing we see is the business rules. The business rules will often be codified in things that look like this if then else thing, if this then that. So we look at the rules and is there a combination of rules? If there's a combination of rules, then we're often going to have a kind of a nested if thing going on. Each entry for first and last name must be more than 2 characters long. So what if it's not more than 2 characters long? Well, then that's an error. So that would be if it's not more than 2 characters long, there's an error. There's an if statement there already. The number of years must be a number ranging between 0.1 and 50. So you could see that if the number of years was less than 0.1, that would be an error. If the number of years was more than 50, that would be an error. So there's a couple more ifs we've got there. Only full and part. Okay, so the only words that are acceptable are the words full and part in the field where we're going to, or sorry, for the variable where we're going to collect the type of employment. Employment status can only be full or part. You can't put any other thing. So must be that, or it would not be valid. Then the next thing that we have to do is we have to have a salary range somewhere between 10 and 200. So any salary less than 10 is an error. Any salary more than 200 is an error. If any of these entries are invalid, we'll get a message which will end the program. So we exit the program if on any, so we can go through these things one thing at a time. And if any of them are wrong, then we get out of the program. Now you could do this as a nested if, or you could do this as independent if statements one after the other. But they would have to, in which case they'd have to be in a sequence. So if we tried the first one, no, actually, I'm sorry. You would use a nested if because we want to get out if anything is wrong. We don't want to keep processing if anything is wrong. So yeah, we would use a nested if, then, if, then, if, then, if. That type of thing. And then lastly at the else. If then else if, elif, right? Elif. Full-time employees who work for the company at least 1 year get an end of service payment of 35% for each year. That's nice. I like to work there. If they're part-timers, work for less than a year, they not qualify for the payment. So we've got another sort of structure there that we have to sort of work through, which is on the payment. All right. So first we're going to gather their data, and there's a nested if then else to gather their data. Then we're going to calculate their end of service payment, and that's going to be done with what, right? If it's less than 1 year, if it's more than 1 year and they worked full time, they get 35%. If they're part-time or less, so it has to be, both of those conditions need to be true for them to get the 35%, and otherwise they don't get one. All right, so that's okay. So there's a if, that one's going to be if employment is more than 1 year and employment type is full, then you get 35%. Else, nothing. And so we have some samples so we can see, right? If you have a first name which only has 2 letters, that's not enough. So there's an error. They put in their first name, they put in their second name. Looks like we gathered both those at the same time, right? This one here, Hannah Barbara, that's okay. Then we put the number of years, but the number of years doesn't meet the range. 0.01 to 50, so there's an error. Okay, again, okay, first name, and okay, last name, number of years worked is 5, salary 30,000, that's all okay. But then they went to do the type of employment, full-time or part-time. FU is not enough. And so we get the error at that point. Okay, last one, let's look at this one. We got the first name is okay, it's more than 2 characters. Second name is okay, more than 2 characters. The time in the company is more than 0.1 of a year, that's okay. Their salary is within the range, but only just, right? It had to be between 10,000 and 200,000. And the type is okay, so no errors in the input. However, they don't qualify for end of service gratuity because they didn't stay for a full year. And so that one, that's how that one works. Again, so we look at this one. First name's okay, second name's okay. The time in the company is in the range between 0.1 and 50. The salary is in the range between 10 and 200,000, so that's okay. The type of work is full, that's okay. It had to either be full or part. And so and because they were full-time and they worked more than a year, they actually get a end of service. And we get to calculate, we have to calculate it now based on the formula that we have, which is 0.35 times the number of years. So 4 times 0.3, how do you get 42,000 out of that? Oh, well, hold on, they were earning 30,000, yes. So 4, I guess it's going to be 4 times 0.35 times 3. Is that 30,000, right? Is that right? Or is it point? Let me try and see this. I'm not sure just how they're doing it, but I think it's 0.35 times 4 times 30,000. Yes. So how the end of service works is we take the salary that they had, the number of years, multiply that by 0.35, and then we get our end of service gratuity, which in this case is 42,000. All right, so I hope from looking at that, we understand the problem. Any questions about the problem? All right, so let's look at a solution. And I want to go through this quickly. So I have a pre-canned solution. Sorry, if somebody's asking me a question. Let's look at the logic again. Why 0.35? Okay, what is it? So we check all of these things. Full-time employees, here it is, get an end of service payment of 35% for each year they worked at the company. So their salary was 40,000 or 30,000 per year, multiplied by 4, multiplied by 0.35. 35% is 0.35. It's 35 divided by 100. So I think we got all the logic. We understand what's going on there. So what I'm going to do now is see if I can, how can I get out of this? My apologies. This is, So we should do all the examples? You should do what? All the samples. This is annoying. I'm trying to get out of this so that I can, oh man. There's only one example to do here. Let's go down in size. Get me out. Is it like that? Geez. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to close that off, go back in. I'm sorry about that. D2L was not behaving in a predictable way for me. Perhaps it is for you, but not too sure what was going on there. So out I come, and let's look at this document again. So actually, you might not be able to see this, but so we actually have a solution for this. Let's have a look at that. First, the pseudocode. Let's go and look at the pseudocode, how that would work, and make sure that we understand this. Now you're going to have to write this, right? So let's go through each of these things. So the end of service rate, we can set that as a float value to 0.035. Any questions about that? Any questions about that? No? All right. So then how we're doing our pseudocode is we specify the type of the variable. That was a float. Then we're going to get their name, and we use input for that. Their name, is going to be input. We give them anything. This will translate directly into Python nicely, actually, right? Then same for the last name. First name and last name, that's pretty obvious, I suppose. Then we've got these nested if to do our error trapping, right? So our first if the length of the first name is less than 2, or the length of the last name is less than 2, then we give an error. So we get those two names, then we check. Then if the number of years they worked for the company, we get the number of years that they worked for the company. If that number is less than 0.1, or that number is more than 50, then we give an error. Right, then that last one, we get the salary from them. If that salary is less than 10,000, or that salary is more than 200,000, then we get an error. Now, lastly, so you see that nested if working, how the if is working. This is if, then, else. If, then, else, right? If, then, else. And so the last part of that is going, and there's another if. If blah, blah, blah. There should be a then there. Else, and the last one is just an else without an if, right? Then, no, hold on. If then else, right? They're separate. And then that is a nested if that does all of that. Now, where's the calculation? It's going to be here. All right. The calculation is only if all of those things are true. That's why it's a nested if. If all of those things are true, then we get to do the calculation. There's the calculation there. It only happens if everything else above was true. Everything else above had to be true. All right, so I gave you a pretty good look at that. I'm hoping that you can sort of represent that yourselves. Try to do it by pseudocode. Nested if then else, if then else, if then else. And the last one is just an else. Okay. And then the last thing that we've got there is we've actually got a Python file. Let's have a look at that. Oops. Oh, well, that would be in my downloads. So have a look at our file and see how that translates into Python. So at the start, we don't have to, with Python, we don't have to specify the types, do we, right? So we don't have to say float. We just have to say the variable and give it a value. Then here we're using getting our inputs. All right, now these are string inputs, so we don't need to use the float thing on them, right? So remember that. Okay, and so then if there's an error, we print the error. Otherwise, we input the number of years and we use a float on that. See how we're using a float function on the input function to convert, because they're going to type a number, and we're going to have anything that's typed into an input statement is received by Python as if it was a string. So we have to convert it from a string to a float. So that does that. Takes the input and converts it to a float, and then we test it. Test that float. If this is true or that is true, if either one of these is true, then we're going to get that error. So what we're looking for is the number of years is too small or the number of years is too big. Then we say got an error. Now, the way this works, because it's a nested if this is true, that's the end of the if. That's the way these nested ifs work, right? If it finds a point where anything is true, it ends and it doesn't do anything else. That's the sort of the magic of it. It makes sort of, I guess you could say, efficient code. Because what we're looking for is we're looking for a chance to not do this. We are not going to do this calculation if there's anything wrong. So we're looking one step at a time. Anytime we find something wrong, we're done. We don't do the rest of it, right? So that's why it's nested if. If this is true, okay, then we go to the next step. But if it's not true, we're finished. If this is true, the second step, if this is true, then we go to the next step. Sorry, it's the other way around, I should say. If it's true, we're actually outing. Otherwise, we go to the next step. If that's true, then we're outing. Otherwise, we go to the next step. If that's true, we're out. Otherwise, we go to the next step. If that's true, we're out. Otherwise, we go to the next step. Lastly, if all of those things have been false, sorry, all the errors have been false, then we go and calculate and print it out. Let's see if that works. You'll have to do it, yeah. You've had a good look at it now, so you should be able to. Please enter your first name. You get the idea. Number of years with the company. I've been here for a long time. And well, I'll just make up a salary. That's too much, right? And there you go. Get a lot of money. So let's go and do it and get some errors. So one error, right? We're out. As soon as we had one error, the rest of the program is not run. That was the if. If there's an error, we quit. Let's try it again. So we did an error with the first name. We do an error with the second name. Error, quit. Right? That was, now why was that? That's the first thing here. If there's an error in the length, we quit. We print and we quit. So then we do the next thing. Okay, so then it's the number of years, right? So first name's okay, second name's okay, number of years in the company. Too few, right? So I will get an error. You must have a number between 0.1 and 50. Where did that come from? That came from here, right? So no error here, so we do the false on that if. The false is that there's no error, so then we get the number of years. But the number of years, if the number of years is too small or it's too big, then we get an error. Otherwise, we go to the next thing. So let's put in a number of years, which is right. Well, we could put a number of years that's too big. We still get the same error, right? Or we put in a number of years, which is actually right. And then it asks you to enter salary. If you put a salary which is wrong, 9,000 is wrong, it's too small, right? Then you get an error saying that the salary must be in the range. So if you run it again, number of years is okay, and the salary is okay. Then are you a full-timer or a part-timer? If you put something else, it's an error. So in order to get the thing, all of the errors have to be false. No error. Okay? So now, what if it's part-time? Don't get any end of service because part-times don't get end of service. So where did that come from? It's down here, right? If your status is part or the number of years is less than 1, sorry, you don't get an end of service. Otherwise, all of those things, none of those things were true, so we get the end of service. All right, I'm going to leave that. I'm going to stop recording now.
Do you need to do the